Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. And this film, it takes place about 300 years after the events of the previous film, and we're mainly centering around this character, Noah, who is, he is in this colony of his own, he has this family, and he's very content with his life, but after a event ends up happening, it makes him go down a path of sorts that might make him rethink everything he has come to know about apes and humans, and whether or not they can coexist together, and what the future really is for them overall. And I was pretty excited for this film. Now, I will admit, when it was first announced, no, I really wasn't, because the previous trilogy of films, which isn't the Matt Reeves trilogy, he only directed Dawn and War, so you can't really call it that, it's more so just the Caesar trilogy, was one that I thought was just one of the most impressive of its kind in a very long time. It's technically a prequel, but it also is doing its own thing and finds a way to take the character of Caesar and make him go down this just like really effective journey of, going from somebody that is made to be one way and making him feel so individualized and human and be this hero by the end of it all. I just thought was just so incredibly well done. And prior to this film, I actually rewatched all of those and for the first time watched all the other Planet of the Apes films, and they've always done a really good job of, while yes, they do have some action set pieces, mainly being a lot more philosophical than that, really being a study of human behavior and, kind of diving into different aspects about society and conformity and things like that. I think that's stuff that this franchise has really always touched upon, and I think in that way, it's probably one of the most, impressive out there because it has stayed grounded the entire time. It never has veered away from the messages. It never has tried to become less than what it is, and that was something that I was just very impressed by. Even the worst film, the Tim Burton one, it still does have thoughtful commentary. It might not be as effective as the other films for sure, but it still tries to at least make an effort to add some commentary in there. It's not, like I said, it's not very well done, but I mean, each one of them still is something that is commendable for just how much this franchise has stuck to its roots and never really veered off in that way, always stuck to what it's supposed to be about and told that story very well. But when it came to Kingdom, I just wasn't really sure what else they could really do. I felt like they scratched the surface of everything they could do with this franchise, but when the marketing started, I really was intrigued. I liked what I was seeing. It seemed like they were going to go in an interesting direction. It seemed like they were going to retain a lot of the, thematic nature of what Reeves did in those previous two films, but also kind of forge their own path moving forward. And so I was really rooting for this film. I was hoping it was going to turn out well, while also being very trepidatious with whether or not it was actually going to deliver. And I have to say, this film was honestly way better than I was expecting. Not only is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes a very worthy follow-up to the trilogy, but also does a great job of really expanding upon the world and forging its own path in a way that I really wasn't expecting to. And if it is able to continue doing what it's doing, showcases that and really demonstrates that there is so much more story to tell moving forward, and really just has me very excited for the future of this franchise. But we are just getting into it right now, starting off with the cast here. And this is something that across all of these movies I think has always been a really big standout. I think the cast usually always ends up delivering here, and I'm happy to say that is very much the case with this one. And I think what's really special about this one in particular is the fact that the majority of this cast are not really that well known of actors. They've been in things before, but they've never really had like that one role that's really made them stick out. And I'm happy to say I think everyone in this film really does end up delivering. But I gotta talk about Owen Teague here, who, yes, I've seen him in some things before, but this is easily his biggest role that I've seen him in, and he has a real challenger because he's following up one of the greatest performances, I think, of the century, honestly, Andy Serkis. I mean, just what a triumphant and spectacular performance that really was, the way he was able to, showcase Caesar and all the different facets of his personality and, the growth and maturity he shows as a character. Teague had really big shoes to fill, and I think, while no, he doesn't quite reach the heights yet, he really shows a lot of promise in this role. I was very impressed by what he does in this movie. It is admittedly a very reactionary role, but he does perform it very well. Noah is a character who does go through a lot in this movie. He starts off the film kind of feeling one way, and he goes through a lot of development in this movie and really ends up becoming, I think, a very interesting character as a result. He kind of is the audience in that way, where you're not really sure how to feel about the different things that are happening, the way he reacts to the world around him and the different opportunities. I mean, I think he just did a really great job here. I've really found myself latching onto him. I thought he really ends up being like the emotional anchor of this entire film. I think so much of the movie is reliant upon us caring about him, and Teague does more than enough to show why we should care about this character, and I thought he did an excellent job here. Freya Allan also is very good here. Not an actor I've seen in really much of anything before. I never really watched The Witcher, so I didn't really see her in that. She's done a couple shows here and there, but really nothing of note that I have seen. But I think that she gives a really strong performance in this film as the character of May. I can't really get into her too much because there's a lot that, thankfully, they have not revealed in the marketing, but I think that she is just a really fascinating character. I think that she just does a really great job portraying this character that has her own sort of journey that she's going down, and you kind of understand that, and maybe doesn't always make the most sound of decisions, but still finding a way to get you to latch onto her character and adding to the complexity of the film. I think that she gives a really strong performance here, and I really enjoyed what she ended up doing in this film. So I think those two actors are really great, but the two actors that I think really ended up stealing this entire movie for me, first off, is Peter Macon, who plays the character of Raka, who is this very wise and knowledgeable ape that ends up becoming this ally to Noah. Really ends up giving just such a fun performance here, adding some comedic relief that I wasn't expecting, but also kind of being this character that trying to, stick true to the true legacy of Caesar and things like that. And I just really enjoyed his character a lot here. He's very likable. He's someone I think you really end up gravitating towards. The relationship that him and Noah form especially is one that is just really easy to buy into, and I thought that he was a lot of fun. Also provided like a lot of comedic relief that I wasn't really expecting. These films aren't really known for their humor, but he added like a really nice level to it that never felt like it was too over the top, and I thought that he did a really good job throughout this film. I really enjoyed his performance here. But maybe the standout of this entire movie, and I think the performance that everybody has talked about and will continue to talk about years from now, is Kevin Durand, who plays Proximus Caesar, who, holy shit, I mean, this guy is just really taking off. I just talked about him in Abigail, and once again here, he is just really showing his range as a performer. First of all, the way he transforms into this very authoritative and manipulative character, and he does that so incredibly well, but he also is able to add these layers to this character that I think a lesser actor just simply couldn't. And while no, I don't think he's like the best villain of this franchise, that's always going to go to Koba, I think that Durand does so much great work here that he is able to put Proximus absolutely on that level of some of the best villains we have ever had within this franchise, and I think he just does an amazing job here. And despite the fact that his character might not be in this movie as much as I thought, every time he is on screen, he is absolutely the main focus of the film. I thought that he just did such a great job. Everyone really does a great job here. I can't really think of a performance that didn't impress me, and I really was just very pleased by everyone in this film. I think everyone did a really great job. Like I said, they had pretty big shoes to fill, and while maybe no, they don't at all, surpass them quite yet, I think they are very much on the level of what we expect from this franchise, and I really just enjoyed all the performances here. And I also just want to give major props to all of these actors as well, because, I mean, the motion capture aspect of this movie is something that I think is generally very overlooked, but they really just fully committed to it here. There's a clip going around of, like, Kevin Durand and Owen Teague, like, acting, like, meeting each other and acting out as apes, and that was their way of, like, practicing, and you really do feel like that hard work has paid off. Yes, there is a level to it that's kind of like method acting, and I know that's like kind of frowned upon these days, but I thought that it was just really great to see. You really feel these actors disappear into these roles, and I'm really excited to see what they continue to do with these characters down the line, because I think if this film is any indication, like I said, I think we're in very good hands moving forward. But now we gotta talk about the directing and the writing here, which that was easily the aspect that I was most interested in, because Wes Ball is a director that I actually do enjoy quite a bit. The Maze Runner films, you know, I don't really like the first two that much, but Death Cure, I think, is generally a great film, and I thought was a really great conclusion to the franchise, and I was really excited to see what he was going to bring to the table. And what I like about him as a director here is that he doesn't try to just do what Matt Reeves did again, or try to replicate what Rupert Wyatt did in Rise. He really does bring his own style to the table, and I think he does a really good job of that here. He is trying to craft a far more epic and action-driven film, but also continuing to add that thoughtful social commentary and a lot of interesting ideas, and you can really feel his passion throughout this movie. It doesn't feel like he was just a hired gun. It does feel like he had a genuine interest in trying to resurrect this franchise and tell his own story, and I think he does a really good job with that. And I mean, he literally said he has like, what, 5 more films in the pipeline? So yeah, I think we're in pretty good hands here. I think he knows what he's doing in this film. It definitely shows that I think when he has the right material to work with, he definitely is a very capable director. I generally really enjoyed his directing throughout this film. Like I said, I think he definitely leans heavier on the action side of things, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I think he also leans heavier into the more, there's some, nice comic relief and things like that. I think the film feels a little bit more hopeful than some of the others have, and I think that that's something he just did a really good job with. I think this far into this franchise, it's really hard to find a fresh vision, but I think Ball did do that here, and I was impressed by his directing in this movie. But the screenplay is really what ended up surprising me here, because what I was most worried about with this film is that we would have some really great action, we would have some amazing motion capture as we expect, which, I'll talk about that when it comes to cinematography, but holy shit, I have a lot to say there. We'd hopefully have some good performances, but we would have a script that would just feel very tired, and it would just kind of feel like we're treading water at this point. It wasn't really doing anything different, and I really couldn't have been any more wrong, because I think what Josh Friedman did such a great job with when it came to the writing of this movie, and really just showcasing that, like, he is not someone that we should doubt as a writer. I mean, this is the guy who did the story for Avatar: The Way of Water, another sequel that I infamously said was unnecessary and ended up actually being a very being a very worthy sequel. I think even better than the first movie in quite a few aspects. He comes on board here, and I think, again, similar to Ball, he is able to add so many interesting ideas to this franchise that just haven't been explored before. When it comes to the characters in this movie, I think that's something this film does do a really good job with. I think that, one of the things that they really needed to do is get you to latch onto these characters, because obviously Caesar has, I think, one of the best arcs in any franchise out there, and it's one that is very hard to try to replicate, and so this film isn't necessarily trying to do that. Noah is a very different character than Caesar. He is someone who has grown up with this very specific mindset, being told that apes, they've taken over, and this is the way of living life, and that humans are supposed to be seen now as pets, basically, and that's kind of how things are supposed to be. And he's used to looking at things in this very rigid sort of way, that when he's now introduced to, someone like a May or someone like a Raka, who start to, give him more of an idea of the principles of what Caesar stood for, and different, ideas of, humans and apes coexisting, you can see how much he starts to shift throughout the film. And I really enjoyed his arc throughout this movie, because the way he starts off, especially, he's so naive and so sheltered and so unaware of the world that's around him. All he really knows is his home, and he's kind of content with that. But as the film goes on, he starts to become a lot more curious, and by the end of the movie is headed in a very intriguing direction that I'm not quite sure how it's really going to go, but I'm generally really excited to see, and I really find myself liking this character. I like what they end up doing with him. I think he works really well as a lead character, and I generally am sold on the idea of what they're trying to do with him. I think all the ideas they're trying to communicate, it works really well when it comes to him as a character. And then someone like a May, I think, is an even harder character to adapt, because yes, she is a human, but she also is someone who has a journey of her own, and I really can't say too much of it because they've done a very good job at showing as little of her character as possible within the marketing. But what I will say is that, yes, she has a reason for being here. There is a reason for her going alongside this mission. She has a journey of her own, and you understand exactly where her character is at. I know that I've seen some criticisms with the way they handle their character. I really didn't take too much of an issue with that, because I feel like she does a good job of representing a side of humanity that we really haven't seen yet within these films. And her kind of, her whole path and what she's trying to do, I thought it made a lot of sense. And it felt like if this were to happen, this would be a very realistic, this would be a very realistic conflict, is what she really ends up going through. Her motivation, it just makes a lot of sense, and I found myself really latching onto her character a lot. But Noah as a character, I think, really represents something that I really just enjoyed a lot about this film, and that's the idea of legacy. That's a big theme throughout this entire movie, is all of these characters are reflecting upon the events that we saw in the, previous trilogy, and they've taken completely different lessons from it. The way that they now are looking at Caesar, and how a lot of them have taken the wrong lessons from him, and they're justifying these, cruel and, just really inhumane actions based upon the teachings of Caesar. That's a really interesting idea, and this film really does dive pretty heavily into that. Why are these characters acting in the way that they are? Why are they so intent on, why is this what they ended up picking up from Caesar? And is this what was intended? And that's why the character of Raka is also such an interesting one, because he really is the only person that knows what Caesar really was trying to do, knows the nobility, knows the heroicism that he really did have, the respect that he had for humans. And as Noah starts to bond closer with Raka, you can see that start to open his mind up a little bit more. And I really just found myself latching onto that story. And I think they do a really good job of diving into that. And especially the different characters that he becomes, intertwined with in this movie. When it comes to like a Proximus, for example, who is not in the movie as much as you think, you absolutely feel his presence throughout the entire movie, because he is a huge reason as to why things have become so, why things have become so limited, why apes are acting the way that they do. A lot of that is due to the way that he has taken, Caesar's lines of apes together strong, and he's turned it into something far more sinister, and he's turned to something that, is benefiting him. And I think that's such an interesting idea. How many times have we looked at, when you look at scripture, or you look at like a religion or something that you follow that happened years ago, and you get a different interpretation from it. This, I think, is just such an interesting idea, and that's something this movie is really just trying to touch upon, is the idea that Caesar's teachings have had much different results than they were supposed to. And while, yes, his words were passed on and his philosophy was passed on, the impact of what has happened is much different than what others have expected. And I think that's something that this movie just does a really great job with. And when it comes to like a Proximus, I think that's exactly the kind of character you need to just really heighten the conflict in this movie and show someone who is so powerful in that way and sees himself as this leader. And and he's a good villain because he generally believes that that's what his role is supposed to be, that he believes that this is how things should be and there shouldn't be any other way of looking at it. And I think that's the way that challenges Noah, who is, you know, you can see throughout this film the gears in his head are turning. He's starting to acquire more knowledge, and as such he's starting to become a lot more open to different ideas. I think just works so well in this movie, and I think it's one of the strongest aspects of this entire film. And the idea that there is this group of apes that are doing all of these terrible things, and they're constantly using Caesar's words as justification for why they're doing those things, I think is a really interesting idea, and something that I think a lot of people are going to find themselves latching onto. How many times have you come across a group that is latching onto like religion, or latching onto, you know, something that like a philosopher said or something like that, and using that as a reason for why they are doing the thing that they are doing? I think the movie really is trying to kind of shed a light onto that. Like I said, I think something that the Apes franchise has always done is kind of be this reflection of humanity in the current state that they're in, and I think that's something that this film continues to do, and I think this is a perfect example of that. And even how they come across similar objects that we've seen in the previous films, the way that they react to it, I thought was just so fascinating to watch. There's this great scene you've seen in the trailer involving this book that they look at, and the way that they react to it was just so incredibly striking to me, and I thought they did a really great job with that. And then when it comes to the human side of this movie, that is not a part of the film I can really say all that much about, because they've done a good job in the marketing of not really showing that much of it. But what I will say is May as a character, I did find myself really gravitating towards. I've seen a lot of criticisms directed at her, and I can understand that, but for me, I didn't really see it as an issue, because I understood where her character was at. She has a journey of her own, she has a reason, you know, she has a mission of her own, she has a reason for going alongside this journey with these characters, and you really understood where her head is at and why she is doing what she's doing. And where they leave her character at the end of this film especially has me really interested to see what they're going to do with her, you know, with the human side of this film moving forward. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas here, and, you know, seeing humans revert to this primal state, but how they're, you know, how they are going about that and things like that, I think is just such an interesting idea, and I think that May represents that so well within this movie, and I really found myself latching onto her character. So, like I said, I think the characters are really strong here, but the world building as well is so well done here in this movie. The way they're able to dive deep into what the world really has become since the events of Apes, of the previous Apes film, is just really well handled here. You know, seeing all these abandoned buildings and this overgrowth, and, you know, the way things have faded out, and the way things are, and things that still exist but things that don't exist, and it gives you this almost dystopian feel to it, and I thought that it was really well handled. It really made it feel that much more futuristic. You really feel that gap, and I think that's something that was really well done. I've seen a lot of films lately where there's a lot of time that's passed, but you don't really feel it. Here, you absolutely do, just based on the way they end up building the world and all the different factions that have formed, you know, the way things have, the way that apes have evolved, and the way that humans have kind of gone all the way down to becoming what apes used to be. I think it's just really well handled in this movie, and I really found myself liking a lot of the world building here. So yeah, I think the screenplay is just really well handled in this movie. I really like what Friedman ends up doing with these characters, and I'm interested to see moving forward what this really is going to be, because I really like a lot of the ideas that they are trying to attack here. Now, when it comes to cinematography in this movie, I mean, this should be a no-brainer winner at this point. It is absolutely extraordinary, and I'm very happy to say it is not at all a downgrade from the previous films. I mean, all the shots still look immaculate here. I mean, it's one of those films where you could just pause on certain frames and you will just be mesmerized at what you're looking at, seeing, but I think in some aspects is even more impressive than what we saw in the previous films, because so much of it is carried by the apes, and those are some of the strongest moments in the previous trilogy, particularly in Dawn. I love the first 12 minutes of that movie being just seeing apes interact, and you get a lot more of that here, and it really is just one of those films where you can't take your eyes off the screen. Seeing the different locations that they end up going to, different states of the world, I think it's really well handled here, and I really enjoyed the cinematography a lot. The look of the apes, I mean, they just feel so incredibly naturalistic. Nothing feels like they looked at the previous movies and are just trying to replicate it. They really, yes, they recapture the style, but they also expand upon it in such an interesting way, and I really enjoyed the cinematography here. And then the motion capture, I just continue to be blown away by. I mean, again, you just really don't feel it at all. You forget you're watching actors with just how organically these apes fit into everything, and I think they just do such a great job with that. And then the action, I touched upon it before. This movie is very much more of an action film than the previous trilogy, and there are some of the best sequences within the entire movie. The third act in particular has this really thrilling sequence involving water. That is all I will say, but my god, it had me on the edge of my seat. And anytime there was action in this movie, I mean, you really do feel the tension. You feel every single second of it. There's a moment in the first act of the film that is honestly pretty minimal and kind of quiet, and what I like about the action is that it is for the most part still pretty sporadic, despite the fact that there is more in this film. It's not constant to the point where you are, you get tired of it. Actually, every time the action happens, you're caught off guard, because I just found myself so wrapped up in these characters and the different themes that the movie was exploring that I was so taken aback by the action, but also was so riveted when the action appeared there. I thought that they just did a really great job with that. There's so many great sequences in this movie that just really impressed me, and I think that is the one thing that they're really doubling down on, and I think doing even better than the previous trilogy, because yes, there were some great action sequences there. I wouldn't really call that trilogy an action trilogy. It was way more character based, and this is too, but there's definitely a much bigger emphasis on the action, and I thought they did a really good job with that. So I really enjoyed this. I think the cinematography in general, again, they really haven't missed a beat in that regard at all. Neither when it comes to the score. Now, yes, it is not Michael Giacchino. Not much is. He's one of the best composers working today. I sing his praises basically any time he ends up doing a score to a movie. But that is not at all to discredit John Paisano's score here, because I think he still does a really good job in giving this film a feel of its own, but also adding to the hopefulness of it all. I really enjoyed his score throughout this movie. I thought that he did a really good job, and it really ended up adding to the emotion of the film, and I really enjoyed what he ended up doing here. And then the editing to this film, yes, this is the longest film within the franchise so far, but I think it very much needed to be. There's a lot of story we're trying to tell here. There's a lot of things we're trying to get introduced to, and as a result, I don't really think there's a lot that you could have cut out. I think the movie does a good job in really taking its time. It actually takes a long time for us to get into the thick of things. There's a considerable amount of time placed onto getting us to know Noah and, the environment that he's in, and then getting us acquainted to all these different characters, and the movie does a really great job with that. So I don't really have many issues when it comes to editing. I think the pacing was honestly pretty good here. That said, this film definitely isn't quite on the level of the previous two films. I think this film is a hair above Rise. I think Rise is definitely the weakest of that trilogy, and I do think this film is better than that, but it's not quite on the level like a Dawn or War, and that really is just due to just a couple things that do bring it down. One of them being is that while, like I said, I think the film does do a good job of introducing us to, Noah and all the different characters that he comes across, across. There's this group of friends that do play a pretty big role in the film, and I just didn't feel like the film spent enough time on them. I think that they needed to do a better job of getting us to really know them. I couldn't really tell you their names. I couldn't really tell you much about what they do other than just being Noah's friends, and I just wanted to know more about those characters because they play a pretty crucial part in the film, but I really just didn't feel they were all that well developed, especially when it comes to like a Raka or a May. I just didn't feel as connected to them. And then really the only other aspect of the film, like I said, I've heard people say that the human side of this film is the weakest aspect, and I wouldn't necessarily agree. I think May's character works really well, but there is a certain part of her character, there is something that is revealed later on in the film that I wish was introduced a lot earlier, because it adds a complexity to her character where she kind of has this choice of sorts that she can make, and it feels like the way that storyline is concluded, it happens like right as it's starting, and it just feels like we didn't really get enough time in seeing her really process this choice and what this really meant for her character. And I just thought they needed to do a better job of fleshing that part of the movie out a little bit more, because that is probably the one aspect of this film that I don't think they did a very good job in getting us to fully understand. In fact, I have quite a few questions regarding that. Now, obviously, they have announced there's going to be like 5 more movies within this franchise, so they have a lot of time to explain that. I just wish they would have introduced this part of the movie a lot sooner than they did, so that way we really would have gotten that much more attached to May as a character and really understood where she's at. I enjoyed her inclusion in the film. I really like her as a character, but there's one aspect that I just didn't feel was touched upon of. I wish I could say more, but like I said, I think this movie has done a pretty good job of not revealing things too much and really keeping things pretty much under wraps. I know the movie's been out for a while, but, you know, just for those that haven't seen it yet, I'm trying to be as respectful as possible in that way. I'm not going to divulge too much into it. It's just something I wish the film would have done a little bit better of a job with. But other than that, this film really just did so much right. I think if you want a movie that finds a way to take a story that already felt like it's concluded, but expand upon it in a way that you really didn't know you needed, adding so many layers and themes that I think the other films didn't really get to touch upon about legacy, about knowledge and things like that, and how that is acquired towards other people and the effect it has on them. I think this movie does a really good job with that. Some really interesting new characters, some great performances, a fantastic villain in Proximus Caesar, who, yes, maybe not in the movie that much, but definitely ends up making a great impression whenever he is. A much bigger emphasis on action, as well as some really solid directing from Wes Ball. I think that King the Planet of the Apes more than asserts itself as a worthy follow-up to this franchise, and if it is able to be on the level of what this is, I think this could end up being just as respected of a franchise. I think this part of the franchise, I think we're really in good hands moving forward. I'm happy to see this film has been doing really well. I'm glad to see the success that it's had. I want to continue seeing these movies. I want to see them do well because I really like the direction that they're going in, and I like that they were able to find something new to do with this universe. I think it would have been really easy for them to just retread, but they really are trying to do something different, and that is something I just really do applaud them for. It may not have the emotional highs of the other films, but it is no less a very impressive effort that does a really great job of really establishing what this franchise could be moving forward. And if it is any, and considering the way we do and end things in this movie, I am really interested to see where they end up going moving forward, because the direction that they're heading in, if it is what I think, could potentially end up being one of the most compelling storylines we have seen within any of these Apes films to date. So overall, I was very impressed by this film, and I am going to give King the Planet of the Apes overall an A-. But over, guys, to my review of King the Planet of the Apes. Let me know if you guys saw this movie overall, left your thoughts in it. Also, what is your ranking of the Apes films overall? I definitely really enjoy the majority of them. There's really only 2 or 3 that I don't really care for, but the majority of the franchise, I mean, I think is pretty consistent, and this film is definitely in the upper half for sure. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.